Obligatory. This didn't happen today, but about 10 years ago. For some reason I was thinking about this recently and wanted to share this story. Throwaway account for obvious reasons. Trigger warning. Abuse, gaslighting. About 11 years ago, when I was 18 turning 19, I was set up with a girl by a friend and have regretted it ever since. Around the same time I was talking to a girl who I went to high school with that was living in another state, but my dumb ass decided that the immediate available sex was more pressing than the girl who actually cared about me. I met up with her. She was really cute and immediately the sexual tension was all I could think about. We ended up on a beach date and things seemed great and ended up meeting up a few more times and doing the deed. At the time we seemed incredibly sexually compatible and things seemed great. The first fuck up was finding out she was 16 and not immediately cutting things off. She convinced me that it wasn't a big deal because the age of consent where I live is 16 and she would be 17 in a few months and her parents didn't care. In hindsight, this was one of the dumbest things I could ever do, and looking back on it makes me feel like some sick piece of shit. I met her mom and stepdad a few weeks later and her stepdad tried to do the typical cleaning the gun in the kitchen shit to try and scare me off, but we got along just fine. At the time, I was working multiple jobs and just wanted someone to spend my time with during my few hours between shifts and my days off. She ended up taking me to her prom, which I never got to experience mine, and for the most part things seemed alright, but this is where things started to go sideways. One of the jobs I was working was night shift for an airline and typically I would get out of work at around 1 or 2 am and drive the 35 minutes home. This time however I asked her if I could stay the night at her place because I had a work meeting I had to fly out to at 6 am. She agreed and told me to just call her so as not to wake up her parents. I showed up and called her multiple times to get no response. I ended up quietly knocking on her window and hearing some muffled voices, which I would later find out was one of the countless times she was cheating on me. Pissed off that I now needed to drive home for 35 minutes just to drive back Indiana a few hours really pissed me off. I got over it quick enough, but then shit started to go sideways. One night we went to a late movie and came home around 1 am. When we walked through the door we noticed her mother was passed out on the couch in the living room and freaked of alcohol. Thinking nothing of it we headed to the bedroom. A little bit of time passed and we could hear moaning coming from her parents' bedroom and she started to knock on the wall trying to tell them to quiet down. When she turned back she noticed her mother was still passed out on the couch and she stormed into her parents' room to find her stepfather fucking one of their friends who she despised. She flipped out and started screaming at both of them. We ended up getting back in my car and leaving, but the nights that followed there was a bunch of fights between us and a bunch of fights between her and her parents. One night this resulted in her and her stepfather in a screaming match in the living room as I was about to leave for work and her stepfather ended up slapping her across the face. I ended up in a shouting match with him and I took her to a friend's house where she would be safe, but I had to go to work. As I was fuming over the incident I ended up calling the cops. Cops showed up at both places and arrested him. I was banned from their house but she wanted to continue to make it work. We ended up just meeting up and driving somewhere to have sex every time we got together after that, but we would fight all the time. Around this time Tumblr was popular and seeing as I didn't follow many people other than her so the posts ended up coming through. Posts of hers complaining about monogamy and other things. We started hanging out with friends when they threw parties and such, but seeing her drunk ended up turning me away from drinking for a while. A few times she would call me when I was at work and I would find out that she was over at their house already and drunk. I would later find out that she had multiple threesomes with them. The sexual encounters we had, over the next few months seemed to constantly be more about her than us and a few of the times I pretended to finish just to end it and move on. The next fuck up came with us going to New York City together for an event. The little bit of money I was making between my two jobs was not enough for me to sustain this trip, but I went anyways because our friend group was going. I was living paycheck to paycheck but had paid for the tickets and hotel already. When we were in New York she threw around money like crazy at the event. Spending around $300 on herself and I ended up running out of money and not being able to get food for a few days. I asked if I could borrow some money for food and she wouldn't give me any. We had an awful attempt at a sexual encounter at the hotel when I tried to be romantic and she was in the shower. On the final day, I ended up getting sick and she was completely different. I got a phone call from my mom when we got back to my car and she told me my uncle, whom I was really close to, had passed away. I broke down in the parking lot. She looked at me and asked, "What happened? Did your cat die?" I was furious and drove her home. Every single day after that she would start fights and I think this was her attempt to get me to break up with her. Fast forward to Thanksgiving and my family went away and I had to work Thanksgiving at one job and Black Friday at my other. She wanted to spend it with me but I asked her to not start a fight because I needed to sleep for a 13-hour-long shift on Black Friday. She agreed but then ended up starting a fight and doing everything in her power to keep me up the entire time. I ended up bringing her home and going to work. At this point I shut my phone off and went through my shift. During this time I bought myself a new TIFU and after work rushed home to set it up and rearrange my room. I put on a movie to enjoy my new TIFU and passed out immediately. About 5 hours later I woke up and turned on my phone. There was a text from her continuing a fight because my phone was off and I sent a text back breaking up with her. I was over it. She had been posting all over Tumblr all week that she wanted to have sex with other people. The next day she would post about having sex with the guy she had been cheating on me with the entirety of our relationship and having a threesome with her best friend and her boyfriend. I deleted my Tumblr and moved on. I wouldn't hear from her for a while after that. I ended up running into the girl that was off at college in another state a few months later and we hit it off, and are still together to this day almost 10 years later. About a year later I got word from a friend that my ex was posting nudes all over Tumblr and ended up on a revenge porn site. One of those pictures was her with about 5 other topless girls that were all underage. She ended up calling me and blaming me for it and threatening to call the police on me for having child pornography. This never made sense to me since she was the one who took the picture and posted it on the internet. I blocked her and moved on with my life and didn't hear from her until about 3 years later. 3 years later I was working at my new job as the assistant store manager of a fairly well-known shoe store chain. I saw one of the girls I used to hang out with in high school. As I approached her my ex popped out from behind her and just went absolutely mental, started screaming all sorts of things at me, and when I told her to leave she stormed out into the mall screaming and calling me things like pedophile and rapist and that I broke her jaw. When the police showed up she tried to hide in one of the other stores, and when they started to question her I overheard them say, "At any point after any of this happened did you contact the police?" and she stumbled over her words for a minute before saying, "Yes I did." Police basically told her that if that's the case then it will all be taken care of, then trespassed her and removed her from the property. I ended up moving jobs a few times after that and saw her from a distance, but last I heard she was a little making pornography dressed as a baby, and married some guy and moved out west. Told, stuck my dick in crazy and ended up dealing with it for multiple years after we broke up. And because I know people are going to bring it up, yes I fucked up by dating someone that was underage, but at the time 2 years didn't seem like a big deal. I would never ever do anything like this again.